The doctors believed the night would take her life, but fate had already chosen a king who had defied death for centuries. Clara Bennett stared at the rain sliding down the hospital window like silver threads unraveling the last hours of her life. The emergency room had grown strangely quiet after sunset, as though even the machines had accepted what every specialist had failed to change. Dr. Emily Carter folded the medical chart with careful hands and forced a gentle smile that never reached her tired eyes. "I wish I had better news," she said softly. "We've run every test, consulted every specialist from Boston to Seattle, and nothing explains what's happening to you. Your heart keeps slowing for reasons medicine can't understand." Clara nodded because she had already memorized every sympathetic expression doctors wore when hope had run out. She was only 26 years old. She had never smoked, rarely drank, worked double shifts at a neighborhood cafe in Brooklyn, and spent every spare dollar helping her elderly grandmother pay rent. Life had never been easy, but it had always felt possible until 3 weeks ago, when exhaustion turned into dizzy spells. Dizzy spells became collapsing without warning, and every sunrise stole a little more strength from her body. Dr. Carter hesitated before speaking again. "Based on your current condition, I don't believe you'll survive until tomorrow morning." The words settled into the room with unbearable stillness. Clara expected fear, anger, or disbelief, yet all she felt was exhaustion. She thanked the doctor, signed the discharge papers because there was nothing left the hospital could do, and stepped outside beneath the cold October sky. Rain drifted through the glow of streetlights, covering the city in a quiet haze. Yellow taxis splashed through puddles while strangers hurried home, unaware that a young woman carrying a paper hospital envelope had just been told she had only one night left to live. Clara wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself and began walking instead of calling a cab. Every block held memories she wasn't ready to leave behind. The bakery where her grandmother bought cinnamon rolls every Sunday. The bookstore that let her read without buying anything. The tiny park where children laughed even after sunset. She wondered how a world so full of ordinary moments could continue so easily without her. A sudden wave of weakness forced her to stop beneath an old stone church. Her heartbeat slowed again. The air around her grew strangely colder, yet the rain no longer touched her skin. She looked up. Someone was standing a few feet away beneath the storm without an umbrella. He wore a perfectly tailored black overcoat untouched by the rain, his posture calm, almost regal. His pale face seemed carved from marble, his dark hair stirred gently by a wind that never reached anyone else, and his silver-gray eyes carried an ancient sadness that made time itself feel smaller. He studied Clara not with pity, but with quiet recognition. "The doctors think you're dying," he said, his deep voice calm enough to silence the rain itself. Clara managed a tired smile. "They seem pretty convinced." The stranger stepped closer, and for the first time that evening, warmth returned to her slowing heartbeat. "They're wrong," he replied. "You are not dying from a disease." Clara frowned. "Then what is happening to me?" His eyes never left hers. "Someone cursed your blood long before you were born." "I do not believe in curses," Clara whispered, though the certainty in her voice sounded weaker than the rain falling around them. The stranger regarded her with quiet patience, as though he had heard those same words countless times across centuries. His expression remained calm, untouched by doubt or urgency, yet something about his presence made the city itself seem distant. The traffic noise faded. The church bells stopped echoing. Even the cold wind circling the old stone building became strangely still. Clara searched his face for any sign that he was mocking her, but she found only compassion hidden beneath impossible composure. "You are wondering whether I am delusional," he said with the faintest hint of a smile. "I would think the same if our positions were reversed." Clara folded her arms tightly across her chest. "I have spent 3 weeks in hospitals. I have had every scan, every blood test, every specialist imaginable. Nobody mentioned curses. Medicine explains what it can," the man replied. "It does not always explain what came before history itself." Clara felt another wave of dizziness. Her knees weakened, and before she could steady herself, the stranger reached out. His hand never actually touched her. It stopped only inches from her shoulder, yet somehow the crushing weight inside her chest eased. The steady ache around her heart softened for the first time in days. She inhaled deeply, surprised that breathing suddenly felt effortless. Her eyes widened. What did you do? Nothing permanent, he answered. I merely slowed the curse. It will continue soon enough. Clara instinctively stepped backward. That is impossible. He nodded once. So is a healthy woman losing months of strength in only 3 weeks without a single medical explanation. She wanted to argue. Every logical part of her mind demanded she walk away, call the police, or convince herself she was hallucinating from exhaustion. Yet her heartbeat had become stronger. The numbness in her fingers had disappeared. Even the constant ringing in her ears had faded. None of it made sense. Who are you? She finally asked. The stranger looked toward the dark clouds drifting above Manhattan before answering. My name is Lucien Ashford. The name meant nothing to Clara, yet the way he spoke it carried quiet authority. She frowned. Are you some kind of doctor? No. A scientist? No. Then what are you? Lucien remained silent for several seconds. When he finally looked back at her, his silver eyes reflected the city lights with an unnatural brilliance. I am the last king of a kingdom most humans believe exists only in forgotten legends. Clara almost laughed despite herself. A king? In New York? Lucien's expression never changed. Kingdoms do not disappear simply because the modern world stops believing in them. Before Clara could respond, another sharp pain spread across her chest. This time it was worse than before. She gasped as the warmth vanished from her hands. Her vision blurred. Streetlights stretched into pale streaks across the wet pavement. She stumbled forward, expecting to hit the ground, but instead found herself supported by an invisible strength that slowed her fall. Lucien watched her carefully, concern replacing his earlier calm. It is beginning earlier than I expected, he said quietly. The curse is accelerating. Clara struggled to catch her breath. Tell me the truth. Am I really going to die tonight? Lucien did not hesitate. If you remain here, yes. If you come with me now, there is still a chance. Somewhere beyond the church, a black luxury sedan rolled silently to the curb as though summoned without a word. Its headlights never flashed. Its engine made no sound. A driver dressed in an elegant charcoal suit stepped outside, opened the rear door, and bowed respectfully toward Lucien before turning his attention to Clara with the same solemn courtesy. Confusion flooded her mind. Nothing about this felt ordinary anymore. Lucien extended his hand, not demanding, not pleading, simply offering a choice. Come with me, Clara. If I am wrong, I will bring you home before sunrise. But if I am right, this will be the only chance you have to see another morning. Clara stared at the open door of the silent sedan, while every instinct urged her to run in the opposite direction. Nothing about the evening made sense anymore, yet nothing about the last 3 weeks had made sense either. The doctors had offered sympathy without answers. This stranger had offered impossible answers without asking for anything in return. Rain continued falling across the empty street, but not a single drop landed inside the waiting car. Lucien remained perfectly still, his hand extended with quiet patience instead of pressure. Time, he said gently, is no longer something you can afford to spend deciding what is impossible. Clara looked at the hospital bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. Her name was printed in faded black letters beside the date she had been admitted. It suddenly felt like a reminder of a life already slipping away. She closed her eyes for a brief moment and remembered her grandmother's favorite advice. Sometimes the safest road is the one that makes the least sense at first. Clara slowly reached forward. The instant her fingers rested in Lucien's hand, a strange warmth spread through her body like the first rays of sunrise after an endless winter. Her breathing steadied. The crushing pressure inside her chest faded once more. Lucien helped her into the back seat with quiet courtesy before taking the seat beside her. The driver closed the door without a sound and guided the sedan away from the church. Manhattan drifted past the windows in shimmering reflections of rain and city lights. Clara expected questions to flood her mind, yet silence filled the car instead. She studied Lucien from the corner of her eye. He appeared completely relaxed, but there was something ancient in the way he observed the streets, as though he remembered every building that had once stood where glass towers now reached into the clouds. Finally, she broke the silence. If you are really some kind of king, why are you here looking for me? Lucien answered without hesitation. I was not looking for you. I was following the curse. Clara frowned. The curse? It has awakened before, he said quietly. Never like this. never inside someone innocent. She lowered her voice. What exactly is happening to me? Lucien turned toward her. Long before your country existed, before these cities were built, there was an agreement between my kingdom and the first families who carried a rare bloodline. They protected something that neither humans nor vampires could allow to disappear. Over the centuries, almost every family vanished. We believed the final bloodline had been lost forever. Clara stared at him in disbelief. And you think I belong to that family? I do not think, Lucien replied. I know. The warmth inside the car suddenly disappeared. Clara noticed the windows becoming coated with delicate frost despite the engine running smoothly. The driver glanced briefly into the rearview mirror, his calm expression replaced by concern. Your Majesty, he said quietly, they have found us. Clara looked behind the sedan. 3 identical black vehicles had appeared from different streets without headlights, maintaining the exact same distance no matter how the driver turned. They moved with unnatural precision through the rainy traffic, almost gliding. Instead of driving, Clara felt fear rising inside her once again. Who are they? Lucien's eyes remained fixed on the approaching vehicles. Members of the High Council, he answered. They sensed the curse the moment I slowed it. They will not understand why I chose to save you before consulting them. Clara swallowed hard. Are they dangerous? Lucien's voice stayed calm, but his expression grew more solemn than before. They believe every ancient law exists to protect the kingdom. Tonight they may decide that allowing you to live is the greatest threat those laws have ever faced. Clara watched the 3 silent vehicles remain perfectly aligned behind them no matter how many turns the driver made through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan. Ordinary traffic drifted between them for a moment, yet every time a bus or taxi moved aside, the black sedans returned to exactly the same distance as though guided by an invisible design. She tightened her grip on the hospital envelope resting in her lap. None of this belonged in the world she had known only an hour earlier. Lucien noticed the fear in her eyes and spoke with the same calm certainty that had followed him since they met. They will not approach while you remain under my protection. Clara looked at him. You sound certain. I am. Then why do you seem worried? A faint smile crossed his face before disappearing almost immediately. Because they rarely question my authority, and tonight they already have. The driver guided the sedan away from the crowded avenues and onto a quiet riverside road where the skyline shimmered across the dark water. Clara realized they were no longer heading toward any neighborhood she recognized. Instead of towering office buildings, elegant stone walls lined the street beneath rows of ancient oak trees that somehow existed untouched within the modern city. She leaned closer to the window. I have lived in New York my entire life. I have never seen this place. Most people never do, Lucien replied. They pass beside it every day without truly seeing it. Clara frowned. How is that possible? Some places choose who may enter. Before she could ask another question, the sedan slowed before an enormous wrought iron gate decorated with intricate silver symbols unlike any language she had ever seen. The gates began opening before the driver reached them. There were no security guards, no cameras, no visible mechanism. They simply moved in complete silence. Beyond them stretched a long stone driveway bordered by towering trees whose branches formed a natural arch overhead. At the end of the road stood a magnificent estate built from pale gray stone, illuminated by hundreds of warm lights glowing behind tall windows. It resembled a European castle transported into the heart of America without anyone noticing. Clara stared in complete disbelief. This cannot be real. Lucien answered quietly. Reality is often larger than belief. As the sedan approached the entrance, dozens of elegantly dressed men and women appeared beneath the grand staircase. Every one of them stood perfectly still. Every one of them lowered their heads the instant Lucien stepped from the car. None of them spoke. None of them even glanced toward Clara until Lucien opened her door personally and offered his hand once again. She accepted it almost without thinking. The moment her shoes touched the stone courtyard, a gentle breeze swept across the entrance. The silver symbols carved into the walls shimmered faintly. Soft golden light flowed through the ancient designs before fading again. Every face surrounding the staircase lifted in astonishment. A dignified woman with silver hair placed one hand over her heart as though witnessing something impossible. An elderly gentleman whispered words Clara could not understand. Even the servants exchanged uneasy glances before lowering their eyes again. Clara instinctively looked at Lucien. Did I do something wrong? Before he could answer, the massive front doors opened from within. An elderly man wearing a dark formal suit descended the staircase with measured steps. Though his hair was completely white, his posture remained perfectly straight, and his expression reflected unwavering loyalty. He stopped before Lucien and bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he said with quiet respect, "the ancient wards have awakened for the first time in more than 400 years." His gaze slowly shifted toward Clara, filled not with fear, but with profound amazement. "It appears the castle remembers her." "I do not remember this place," Clara whispered as every pair of eyes remained fixed upon her with quiet astonishment. The elderly gentleman lowered his head respectfully before answering. "That is because you have never stood here before, Miss Bennet. Yet these walls remember every soul connected to the ancient covenant." Clara looked toward Lucien, searching for reassurance. Instead of surprise, she found deep contemplation in his silver eyes. He appeared to be studying the glowing symbols woven through the stone itself. "They have been dormant for generations," he said softly. "I believed they would never awaken again." The elderly man nodded. "So did we, Your Majesty." A gentle bell echoed somewhere inside the vast estate. It carried no urgency, only quiet dignity, as though announcing the arrival of an honored guest rather than warning of danger. The assembled servants stepped aside in perfect silence, creating a clear path toward the enormous entrance hall. Lucien offered Clara his arm. "You should come inside. The curse grows weaker within these walls." She hesitated only briefly before accepting. The warmth returned almost immediately. Together they crossed the threshold, and Clara found herself standing beneath a breathtaking ceiling painted with constellations that shimmered softly despite the absence of visible light above. Marble floors reflected hundreds of crystal chandeliers, while towering bookshelves stretched upward along curved balconies filled with volumes older than the United States itself. The air carried the faint scent of cedar, old parchment, and blooming white flowers. Nothing resembled the frightening castles described in horror stories. Instead, the place felt timeless, solemn, and unexpectedly peaceful. Clara slowly turned in every direction. "This feels alive," Lucien answered with quiet affection. "It has watched over my family for more than 1,000 years. Every stone remembers those who walked before us." As they continued deeper into the grand hall, Clara noticed elegant portraits lining both sides of the corridor. Each painting depicted men and women dressed in clothing from different centuries, yet every face carried the same calm dignity she had already seen in Lucien. Suddenly, she stopped walking. One portrait near the center of the gallery held her attention completely. It portrayed a young woman with gentle blue eyes and chestnut hair, standing beside a king whose appearance closely resembled Lucien. The woman wore a silver pendant shaped like an intricate circle surrounded by stars. Clara instinctively touched the necklace she had worn since childhood beneath her sweater. Her fingers froze. She slowly pulled it into the light. The pendant resting against her palm matched the one in the painting exactly. Her heartbeat quickened. How is this possible? Lucien turned toward the portrait. For the first time since they met, genuine surprise crossed his face. He stepped closer to the painting, then looked back at Clara's necklace. The designs were identical down to the smallest detail. The elderly gentleman beside them quietly removed his glasses as though unable to trust his own vision. "That pendant disappeared centuries ago," he murmured. "We believed it had been destroyed with the final guardians." Clara shook her head. "My grandmother gave this to me when I was 6 years old. She said it had belonged to our family for as long as anyone could remember." Lucien's expression grew more thoughtful than ever before. He looked once again at the young woman in the portrait. "Her name was Eleanor Ashcombe," he said. "She was the last human guardian of the Covenant. According to every record we possess, her entire bloodline vanished 400 years ago." Clara stared silently between the painting and the necklace resting in her trembling hand. Before anyone could speak again, every chandelier inside the great hall flickered once. Then the ancient silver symbols woven across the marble floor began glowing softly beneath Clara's feet. Somewhere deep below the castle, a single enormous bell rang one slow, resonant note, and the elderly gentleman quietly whispered the words no one in the room had expected to hear. "The Hall of Origins has accepted her." The deep note of the bell lingered through the castle like a memory awakening after centuries of silence. Clara instinctively stepped back as the glowing symbols beneath her feet slowly faded into the marble once more. Every person inside the grand hall remained perfectly still, as though no one wished to disturb whatever ancient force had just recognized her presence. Lucien looked toward the elderly gentleman. Sebastian, has the hall ever responded this way before? Sebastian lowered his eyes respectfully. Only once, Your Majesty. The night the covenant was first sealed. Clara tried to steady her breathing. I still do not understand what any of this means. I am just a waitress from Brooklyn. My family has never spoken about kingdoms or ancient covenants. Lucien's expression softened. That is precisely why someone worked very hard to erase the truth from history. Before Clara could respond, a graceful woman dressed in deep blue approached carrying a silver tray. Upon it rested a crystal glass filled with clear spring water instead of wine. She bowed respectfully before offering it to Clara. Please drink, Miss Bennet. The castle spring carries no magic. It simply restores strength to those welcomed here. Clara accepted the glass politely. The water tasted unlike anything she had ever experienced. It was cool and remarkably fresh, carrying a faint sweetness that eased the lingering heaviness in her chest. She realized she had not coughed once since entering the estate. Lucien noticed the change immediately. The curse cannot spread freely inside these walls. Whoever created it expected you would never find this place. Clara slowly lowered the empty glass. Then whoever cursed me knew I existed long before I was born. Lucien gave a quiet nod. That is what troubles me most. A sudden chime echoed from somewhere above. Moments later, another elderly servant descended the curved staircase with measured urgency. He stopped before Lucien and bowed deeply. Your Majesty, the High Council has arrived. They request immediate audience in the moon chamber. Clara felt the atmosphere inside the hall change. Although no one raised their voice, a quiet tension spread among the assembled household. Lucien remained composed. I expected as much. Sebastian looked toward Clara with concern. Shall we prepare the sanctuary? Lucien considered the question for a brief moment before answering. No. If the Hall of Origins has accepted her, hiding her now would only confirm their fears. Clara looked from one face to another. They keep talking about me as though I belong in a history book. Lucien turned toward her. Tonight, you may discover that history has been waiting for you far longer than you have been waiting for answers. As they walked toward an elegant corridor illuminated by soft golden lamps, Clara noticed something unusual along the walls. Hundreds of framed family trees stretched through the centuries, each carefully handwritten in flowing ink. Names branched outward generation after generation until one chart near the end suddenly stopped. The final line contained only a single sentence written beneath an unfamiliar crest. The guardian bloodline lost beyond memory. Clara paused before it without understanding why. Then a strange sensation passed through her mind. Not quite a memory, not quite a dream. She saw sunlight spilling across a stone courtyard, heard a child's laughter echoing through ancient halls, and felt warm hands fastening the same silver pendant around someone's neck. The vision vanished as quickly as it appeared. Clara placed one hand against the wall to steady herself. Lucien immediately stepped beside her. What did you see? She looked at him, still trying to understand it herself. I do not know. It felt familiar. Before Lucien could answer, every candle along the corridor suddenly flickered at once. A calm but unmistakably powerful voice echoed from somewhere deeper within the castle. Bring the human to the moon chamber. The council will decide whether destiny has truly returned, or whether this kingdom stands before its greatest mistake. The words echoed through the corridor long after the unseen voice had fallen silent. Clara felt an uneasy calm settle over the castle, the kind of silence that existed before an important decision rather than before danger. Lucien met her eyes with quiet confidence. Whatever happens inside the moon chamber, you will not face it alone. Clara wanted to believe him. Yet only a few hours earlier she had been sitting in a hospital room preparing for the end of her life. Now she was walking through an ancient castle toward a council that questioned whether she should exist at all. Sebastian led them through a series of elegant hallways where moonlight filtered through stained glass windows, covering the polished floor with shifting patterns of silver and blue. Every hallway seemed older than the last, filled with statues of kings and queens whose expressions reflected wisdom instead of pride. Clara noticed that many of them wore the same star-shaped crest engraved on her pendant. The deeper they traveled into the castle, the stronger the strange feeling inside her became. It was no longer simply familiarity. It was recognition. She could not explain how she knew which corridor turned left before seeing it, or why one carved archway felt welcoming while another carried quiet sorrow. It was as though forgotten memories rested inside the stone itself, waiting patiently for someone to remember them. Lucien observed her carefully. "You have noticed it, have you not?" Clara nodded slowly. "I keep feeling like I have been here before, but I know that cannot be true." He answered gently. "Memory does not always belong only to the mind. Sometimes it belongs to the promises carried through generations." They arrived before a pair of magnificent silver doors nearly 20 feet tall. Their surfaces were engraved with a full moon surrounded by 12 stars. The symbols shimmered softly as Clara approached. Without anyone touching them, the doors slowly opened inward. Beyond them stretched a circular chamber unlike anything Clara had ever imagined. A crystal dome revealed the night sky overhead, where the full moon shone brilliantly despite the rain clouds that had covered Manhattan only moments earlier. 12 elegant seats formed a wide circle around a polished marble floor. 11 were already occupied by dignified men and women dressed in formal dark attire that reflected different eras of history. Their appearances varied, yet every face carried the same timeless composure. Only one seat remained empty. The largest one at the center belonged unmistakably to Lucien. As he entered, every council member rose respectfully. They bowed together with perfect discipline before returning to their seats. Clara immediately realized something important. They honored their king completely. Their disagreement was not born from ambition, but from genuine conviction. An elderly woman with silver eyes spoke first. "Your Majesty, we recognize your authority beyond question. However, the laws protecting this kingdom were written through sacrifice. Bringing the final guardian into these halls without consulting the council places every citizen under uncertainty." Lucien remained calm. "I brought her because leaving her outside these walls would have guaranteed her death before sunrise." Another council member folded his hands thoughtfully. "That may be true, but the ancient records contain another warning. If the guardian bloodline returns while the forgotten curse still lives, the balance between our worlds may change forever." Clara listened in stunned silence. Finally, she gathered enough courage to speak. "Excuse me." Every face turned toward her at once. "I still do not know what any of you believe I am. I only know that I was told this morning I had almost no time left to live. If I carry answers, I would like to understand them as much as you do." The chamber became completely silent. Several members exchanged thoughtful glances. Then the oldest counselor slowly stood and looked directly at Clara with surprising kindness. "Perhaps, Miss Bennet, the greatest mystery is not who you are. It is why someone spent 4 centuries making certain that neither you nor we would ever find each other until tonight." The moon chamber remained silent after the elder counselor finished speaking. Clara looked around the circle of timeless faces and realized that none of them viewed her with hatred. They looked at her the way historians might look upon the unexpected return of a chapter they believe had been erased forever. The distinction mattered. It gave her enough courage to remain standing instead of shrinking beneath their attention. Lucien stepped forward until he stood beside the empty center of the chamber rather than upon his throne. "I did not bring Clara here to challenge our laws," he said calmly. "I brought her because our laws were created to preserve life when destiny itself stood in danger. If the covenant truly survives within her bloodline, abandoning her would be the greater betrayal." A distinguished council member with dark silver hair folded his hands thoughtfully. "No one disputes your intentions, Your Majesty. We question whether the curse was designed to lead us into making exactly that decision." Clara listened carefully. The words settled into her thoughts until one question became impossible to ignore. If someone cursed my family centuries ago, why wait until now? Why not sooner? The council exchanged quiet glances before the oldest woman answered. "Because some ancient powers awaken only when the proper moment arrives." She slowly rose from her chair and approached Clara with measured grace. "May I see your pendant?" Clara hesitated for only a second before unclasping the silver necklace and placing it into the woman's waiting hands. The elder studied its intricate design beneath the moonlight streaming through the crystal dome. Every engraved line appeared flawless despite its obvious age. She closed her eyes briefly, then returned the pendant with surprising gentleness. "It is authentic," she whispered. "There can be no doubt." Lucien watched carefully. Then the archives were correct after all. Sebastian stepped quietly into the chamber carrying a weathered leather case. He placed it upon a marble table and opened it with extraordinary care. Inside rested an ancient parchment protected beneath crystal. Its edges had faded with time, but the elegant handwriting remained perfectly preserved. Sebastian carefully turned the document toward Clara. At the bottom of the page appeared an elaborate crest identical to the one engraved upon her necklace. Above it stood two signatures. One belonged to King Lucien Ashford, written in flowing ink centuries earlier. The other belonged to Eleanor Ashcombe. Clara stared at the familiar name in disbelief. Lucien spoke softly. Eleanor was the first guardian. She chose peace over fear when humans and vampires nearly destroyed one another through misunderstanding. Together we created the covenant that allowed both worlds to exist without endless conflict. Clara's eyes moved slowly across the ancient page. "I cannot even read this language." "You should not be able to," one council member admitted. "It has not been spoken among humans for hundreds of years." Clara lowered her gaze toward the first line almost absent-mindedly. The unfamiliar symbols seemed to shift before her eyes. Without understanding how, she suddenly knew exactly what they meant. The words emerged naturally from her lips, clear and effortless, spoken in a language she had never learned. As her voice echoed through the chamber, every council member immediately rose to their feet. Sebastian's eyes widened behind his glasses. The elder woman pressed one hand against her heart. Lucien stood perfectly still, unable to hide his astonishment for the first time that night. Clara stopped speaking and looked around in confusion. "Why is everyone staring at me?" Lucien answered almost in a whisper. "Because you just read a language that disappeared from the human world 4 centuries ago, without making a single mistake." "I did not know what those words meant," Clara said quietly as the astonished silence continued to fill the moon chamber. "They simply appeared in my mind the moment I looked at the page." The oldest counselor slowly nodded. "That is how the ancient language was always described in the earliest records. It was never memorized. It was remembered." Lucien approached the parchment and studied the faded lines with renewed attention. "For centuries we believed only Eleanor Ashcombe could awaken its voice. If Clara has done the same, then the covenant is no longer a forgotten promise. It has become a living one once again." Before anyone could continue, the silver symbols engraved around the circular floor began glowing with gentle light. Unlike the sudden flashes that had appeared elsewhere in the castle, this illumination spread gradually, forming a complete ring around Clara without causing fear or discomfort. She looked down in surprise as tiny points of light rose from the marble. Like floating stars, they circled her quietly before drifting toward the crystal dome above. Sebastian watched with amazement. The chamber itself is responding. One of the council members closed his eyes as though listening to something beyond ordinary hearing. "The castle has recognized the rightful guardian." Another member shook his head thoughtfully. "Or perhaps it has recognized the one chosen to restore what was broken." Clara instinctively touched the pendant resting against her heart. For the first time since leaving the hospital, she realized something remarkable. The crushing weakness that had followed her for weeks had completely disappeared. Her breathing was steady. Her hands no longer trembled. Even the constant exhaustion that had made every step feel impossible had faded into quiet strength. She looked at Lucien. "The curse. I cannot feel it anymore." His expression remained calm, though unmistakable relief softened his eyes. "Inside these walls, the covenant is protecting you. But protection is not the same as freedom." Clara frowned. "You mean it can return?" Lucien answered honestly. "Unless we discover who created it and why, the danger remains." A gentle breeze suddenly crossed the chamber, although every window remained closed. The ancient parchment resting beneath crystal slowly turned its own pages until it stopped at a section sealed with dark blue wax. No one had touched it. The council members stared in silence. Sebastian carefully removed the protective cover. The brittle page opened by itself, revealing a map unlike any modern chart. It showed coastlines that no longer existed, mountain ranges long forgotten, and at the very center stood a symbol identical to Clara's pendant. Beneath the map appeared a single line written in the ancient language. Clara looked at the words, and once again understanding arrived without effort. She spoke them softly. When the final guardian returns, the hidden sanctuary shall open beneath the first moon after the awakening. The room fell completely silent. Lucian looked toward the crystal dome, where the full moon shone directly overhead. Tonight is the first full moon since the hall recognized her. The elder counselor slowly smiled for the first time that evening. Then the sanctuary has already begun to open. Before Clara could ask what the sanctuary was, a low, resonant sound echoed beneath the marble floor. It was not the sound of danger, but of something ancient stirring after centuries of peaceful sleep. The glowing ring surrounding Clara slowly expanded across the chamber until it reached the foot of Lucian's throne. As the light connected them, Clara looked into his silver eyes and saw not fear, nor uncertainty, but quiet hope. Somewhere deep below the castle, hidden doors that had remained sealed for 400 years began opening one by one, and every soul in the moon chamber understood the same truth at the exact same moment. Clara Bennett had not arrived at the castle by chance. She had arrived exactly when history had been waiting for her.